Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Again? We're looking at an ink again today. I can talk, I don't know what you're talking about. Anyways, we're revisiting an ink. It's an ink that I reviewed a very long time ago, so it needed addressing again, because those old videos, don't go find them. Anyways, but today's ink is by Diamine here in the plastic 30ml bottle. And I actually also have some in cartridges, but I didn't want to dig them out. It's Ancient Copper. Now, this is one of those inks that people have tried and failed to replicate. It is such a beautiful, wonderful, coppery, like genuinely coppery color that very few inks or manufacturers have come close. So it is infamous, and with good reason. So, let's get into it. Two pens I used were these. This is a Nemosine Singularity. It has a 0.6 stub, and as you can probably tell, you can't see through those tines. So it's a bit on the dry side. I intentionally keep it that way. And this is a Pilot 78G in double broad. And if you're familiar with your 78Gs, both broad and double broad are actually stubs. So it's a broader stub. I think this is a 1.2 millimeter something. Yeah, anyways, let's check out some comparisons, shall we? Now, here is Diamine Ancient Copper. Now, as I said, this is an ink that is very hard to get anywhere near as smack on as this. Out of about 680 samples, these are the four closest, so my apologies. Now, the next closest is Noodler's Antietam. Of course, named after the Battle of Antietam. This has a bit more of that Georgia clay kind of quality to it. This one has tan, it has red, it has orange, it has all those different facets of copper. This one, it definitely has a lot of those coppery elements, but it's more of a tan and orange. Where they heavily overlap, you get some of a reddish quality to it. It really is like a Georgia clay red, but not quite what Ancient Copper is. Now, another Diamine ink, Brandy Dazzle. Now, if you were able to like skim out the glitter, you'd get a close version, but it's not quite as saturated, but they are definitely siblings of a sort. You can kind of tell. And goddamn you, glitter. Now, next is Toucan Sienna. And this is where we really start to reach the point of like, there are a few people who've even come close. Now, this is a terracotta color. This is, I mean, if you've been to the town of Siena, all the buildings look like this. If not the buildings, and the roofs. If not the roofs, then the wall. But it's tan. It's definitely a terracotta color. It doesn't have that red that you see under here, especially when I bring it in and I sort of turn it to the side. You can see in these parts where it starts to get red. And then down here, where it's really thin, it's orange. And yet here in some parts where it's like scraped a certain way, it starts to look tan. Sienna is a beautiful terracotta color, but it's mostly just that soft terracotta, that red clay that's actually, once it's baked, turns brown. Great ink, great color, not copper. And lastly, Noodler's Tiananmen Red. As I said, I scoured 680 sample cards, and this was the fourth. So it captures some of this red undertone we get through here, but that's it. Like, down here, we start to see some of it, like, through here. Yeah, that's really about it. But this is like a straight kind of communist red. But yeah, so, blood and communism. Bear with me. Chromatography. Actually, now that I think about it, blood and communism do tend to go together. But anyways, chromatography, what I tend to do is I draw a line, and then one, I'll stick directly into water, the way you're supposed to do chromatography. And then the other one, I'll wait until this initial standard sample is dry, and then I'll dunk this one. Usually takes about 8 to 10 minutes. Now, This ink is kind of fascinating when you break it down. Here we've got sort of like a soft gray color, almost barely hints at purple. Then we get this like Easter pink, like pastel pink up through here. You can definitely tell where the ink starts. Then you get sort of a light pink through here. Then we get this terracotta sort of color, but it's more of an orangey. And then we get like a tan color, and then in certain like bursts, we get this sort of like darker, more coppery brown. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here. And here where I let it dry, you can definitely see where that initial line was. It definitely gets darker. Here, it seems to sort of resist being pushed up a bit more, and so we have less of a distinct separation, but we do have this pink, we do have some of this orange, we do have some of this red-ish through here, and then we have these shoots of dark brown, but they're more distinct. But yeah, as you can probably tell just by all that, this is a saturated ink. Chemical tests. Now, I don't know how accurate this is because this paper was oxygenated, which means everything reacted badly, including the water, so But anyways, as you can tell, water got it moving, but since it's so heavily saturated, it got it moving everywhere. Bleach, 1/3 bleach, started to break up a lot of the orange component where it was laid on really heavily. Some of that brown remained. Ammonia pen flesh affected the water, started to really mess with it. Hydrogen peroxide also really started to really mess with the water, but also you start to see some of these like pink undertones and like salmon-y kind of colors, and also really messed up the paper, but that could just be because the paper was awful. Paper test. Clairefontaine 90 grams per square meter. Yep. So this is a beautiful coppery color. It really, really is. And admittedly, this is a very dense paper. It's, you know, got a lot of oomph in it. It's a lot of stuff in a small space. 90 grams per square meter. Yeah, I buy it. But as you can definitely see here, we get that wide breadth of shading. Like we have this near orange down here, and then it gets tan, and then it starts to turn more of a red, and then we get brown. This is a unparalleled ink. Like I don't think there's any other ink that comes close to this for what this does. Which is a darker color, which is well saturated, which covers many sort of different spectrums of color. It covers brown, it covers red, it covers orange. This is the Apache Sunset of darker colors, if you ask me. Apache Sunset, because it starts out light, it can move further and further into dark. This starts out fairly medium in the spectrum and goes to dark, because as you can see in some of these little halos around the wettest parts, it starts to approach almost black in the halos. But yeah, anyways, the writing, beautiful shading, rich color. Here you can't see any of the lines in the quadrilateral paper, so it is not undersaturated for sure. But because it is so heavily saturated, it does take longer to dry. So even with that fairly small stub that's a bit dry writing, on this super dense paper, yeah, it took 17 seconds. So if you want this ink, you gotta earn it. You gotta wait for it. You gotta put up with it. If you ask me, it's worth it. It's beautiful. But yeah, that larger stub, double broad in the 78G took 31 seconds, but also I want you to see the density of color in this smear. That's a lot of ink in there. Now here I postulate about how absolutely wonderful this stuff is. And yeah, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, which is nice for such a heavily saturated ink and one that isn't like super light on the spectrum. So that's really nice. Admittedly, it's dense paper. But here's something that this ink does have a bit of a problem with. It is not good at resisting water. If you're looking for a waterproof copper ink, I don't know what to tell you. Because you're not going to find one that's actually coppery, and you're not going to get one that resists water. It dyed the page severely. What remains is very little, and it's patchy. So do not get this ink wet. But didn't get pushed out the back or anything like that, so there's that. Next up is Fabriano EcoQua. This is an 85 gram per square meter paper. I really love this stuff. It is my favorite. Yes, I pick favorites. But yeah, it's it looks so beautiful on here. Again, I'm just gonna like lead you to the scrubby just because you get so many different colors in there. And it looks great. And once again, we have these dark halos where it's laid on thickest, and I know I'm not gonna get this on camera. But you get sheen, and it's this like sea foamy green kind of a metallic sheen, which I think is so beautiful because if you're familiar with copper, when it oxidizes, it turns that color. Statue of Liberty, it's not painted that color. It is made of copper and it oxidized to that color. So I love that this ink, when it's copper, when it sheens, it turns the same color. It stays on that copper thread. I love it. I really love this ink. And again, rich, dense color, wonderful shading, you get a halo effect. It's actually coppery. Private Reserve, I like it as a brand, but your Copper Burst is just brown. Were you even trying? There are plenty of cool things that are brown. You can name it anything. Don't shoot for copper, man. You just miss the mark by so much when you call it copper. But again, this is a very saturated ink, as once again you can really see in the smear. And here it almost just turns like soft orange, where it's laid on so thin because it's just been smeared. But anyways, that 0.6 stub, 16 seconds to dry. More substantial stub, 31. You gotta have patience with this ink. You have to. But in my opinion, it pays off. Now, it was slightly wet flowing, and it generally has been for me. It's about a 6 out of 10. You don't have to fight it out of a pen. I prefer my pens to be a bit more on the wet side, so this ink does some of that work for me. Don't have to tinker with them. I knew I was going to have trouble getting the sheen on camera, but I didn't want to lay it on anymore because I didn't want to give you like a false idea of like, oh, it bleeds or whatever, because it doesn't. As I say here, no bleed, no feather, no spread. There's no echo, which is nice. Oh, okay, well maybe the scrubby, but that's a very solid band of color. But like as I've said in so many of my videos, I'm super sensitive. This wouldn't bother me so much, especially because, I mean, when am I just going to like fill in straight color? The writing, really not so much. But again, the Achilles heel, the place where it's not 100% awesome, water. Once again, it did dye the page, and it dyed it this sort of like soft Eastery pink kind of thing we see in the chromatography. And it's really, really gone. The camera is actually increasing the contrast a little bit, so I don't know, maybe if you spill on this stuff, get out a video camera, and then you can read it and recover some of it. But yeah, it's not great at the water resistance thing. Now next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. I feel like a lot of us are pretty familiar with this stuff. There is a ceramic coating added in the pressing process, but I really hope I can get it here. Come on. Oh, you can just kind of see it in the scrubby. Come on. This tiny little like micro little halo oh, there, down at the bottom. Come on. Oh, you can do better than that. Anyways, there is sheen on here. But yeah, I think the ceramic coating kind of added to the whole drying time thing, especially because this paper is not as dense as the previous two. But yeah, that small stub took 19 seconds to dry. The double broad stub took 34. But again, you see the density of color, you see the amazing shading, you see this dark halo effect. There is sheen. My camera is just not doing it today because it's mad at me for some reason. This is not good at communication. This isn't a healthy relationship. But the writing is gorgeous. Look at this. Look at the shading in that. I mean, even if you're not one who likes shading in your writing, just from like an engineering sort of prospect, you have to be kind of amazed at what this ink can do. And it is undeniably coppery. It is not brassy, it is not bronzy, it is coppery. Just gorgeous. And it's this really fine line to walk because, you know, like coppery, go a little too far and it's just orange. You go a little too far and it's just red. You go a little too far and it's just brown. And I think they've sort of perfectly captured that in that it's a little bit of all those things, and where it overlaps and how much is where you fall in that spectrum. So, can you tell me I love this ink? But yeah, once again, no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo. no spread. And did I mention no spread? Oh, and also there's no spread. I don't know why I did that. I mean, maybe, but yeah, there's no spread, just in case. But yeah, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread. No echo. There is some sheen, but it's really, I wish I could get this on camera for you, because I really do love that it retains that oxidized copper color. But anyways, water test, dyed the page, but it looks darker on here. You know, like it seems a little bit more distinct than the previous ones, but I almost don't want to say, because this is older Rhodia, as I said in some previous videos. I've been having trouble getting not nature affected oxygenated Rhodia, and especially Clairefontaine. I think I just got some this past week that should be a bit better, but I mean, I got some, these are older tests. So anyways, yeah, as you can see down here, see how it starts to look a little funky? I'm worried that part of why it's sunken and stayed is because the paper has been affected. So, but yes, up next is Tomoe River, known for drawing out shading and sheen and dry times and echo. But this is also a cream colored paper. And I specifically choose different colored papers to show you how the background color of the paper can affect the quality of the ink that you put on top of it. So here we have Clairefontaine and Rhodia, which I'd say is more of a white. Here we have the Fabriano EcoQua, which I'd say is sort of more of an ivory. And then we have Tomoe River, which is very clearly a cream color. So what does this do? Well, I think it's pretty clear. Turns it brown. Somehow the sort of vague yellowness of the background seems to like cancel out a lot of the red and the orange, and it sort of highlights the brown. So we do lose a lot of the like facets of different colors, but I do want to say, as browns go, this is a pretty nice brown. This reminds me of, as I say here, like a soft garment leather, like a beautifully tanned bit of leather, and it has that orangey quality. It starts to look a bit more, starts to look a bit more like the Sienna by Toucan, and it also starts to look like parts of Antietam, like part of that Georgia clay, but with maybe just a little bit less red. Now, as I said, this paper does draw out shading and sheen, and we definitely have that. We have a very wide breadth of shading. You can see how light it gets here and how dark. The halos are practically black. And that was unfortunate. I was really, like, again, laying it on stupid thick to try and ensure sheen, but for some reason on here, it just turned out black. We lose that green. And I don't know why. And unfortunately, because I just kept laying it on stupid thick, it's practically visible through the back. You can see it didn't bleed through. But because the paper's so thin, this is like 52 grams or something per square meter, so it's like almost half the density of Clairefontaine. Or I should say width. Maybe? Yeah, this is not a super light ink. Like I said, Patchy Sunset sort of starts at the light color, which is like yellow, and then darkens to almost red. This pretty much starts at the middle and then darkens to almost black. So you're going to get some echo. Not just because this is a fairly darn well saturated ink, but also just because this paper is so thin. And then where it shades, because it shades from middle to dark, yeah, it's going to become more distinct. This would drive me crazy, even in that smaller stub, because I am one of those super picky people. But I love this ink. I think it's worth it. Now, that small stub took 29 seconds to dry. Like I said, it draws out dry times, because how this paper works is essentially the paper won't let anything sink in. So everything just sits on top, and you essentially have to wait out for this ink to evaporate, like the water in it to just evaporate. So this is where you're going to need that saint's patience. So 49 seconds to dry in that double broad. But we also get a very distinct dark halo effect, which I've said previously I love for the increased contrast. Makes it very easy to read. epic dry times. Now there's no bleed, no feather, no spread because Tomoe River, don't play that. But there is some sheen, but it's just black here, which is so unfortunate. But there is some echo as well. Now this paper loves to let ink just slide away when you add water, which you can practically see here. But here, it also sort of took a lot of the ink when we mopped up the water with it. So that's nice. It could have dyed the page a lot worse, especially compared to what we've seen previously. So there's that, but yeah, whatever you wrote is really, really gone. Although, once again, you might benefit from cracking out a video camera. Fascinating. Now the next 3 tests, I only used that small dry writing stub, the Nemosine, and used the 78G to write the name. These are more absorbent papers, they're more economically produced papers, so it just seemed like more of a fair fight, if you know what I mean. So, here is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. This stuff is about as bad as it gets. I actually got a message today from someone who said that they found printer paper so bad that even the printer made it bleed and feather. I want to question that paper's existence. I believe it's true, but this is the worst I've ever encountered, and please believe me, that's pretty bad. So, we got spread. You can see the line width definitely increased. You can see we lost a lot of the shading. However, this is still a very bold, bright color. It is still super coppery, which is nice because a lot of times the absorbent paper, I mean, yeah, it draws the ink in, makes it harder to wash out, but it's almost like it also sucks the life out of it and just like strangles like all of the vibrancy out of it. Here, it can't. It just doesn't. That's still a super coppery color. It almost looks like someone with auburn hair. It's like a bunch of Irish people on a page. What am I talking about? I'm sorry to offend people. Anyways, 2 seconds to dry. A lot of spread. And we got lots of bleed. But it's in tiny spots. So maybe if you were using a rounded nib, you might have more bleed because, you know, the edge of a stub can sort of like drag the ink across the page. But you have some spots where it has reached the back. I don't know if it dotted the page below, but it definitely reached the back. It definitely pushed all the ink out the back. And we do have feathering. Like you see in the S, well, all of seconds. But it's not everywhere, but it can be distracting, like the dot in the eye. It's not ideal. Yeah, this maybe isn't, like if you're super picky and you want to just be perfect and beautiful, maybe don't use it on the world's worst paper. Crazy idea. But now, as I said, more absorbent papers draw the ink in, make it harder to wash out. And we definitely see that here. I mean, this is darker than anything else we've seen before. But it did kind of feather and explode, and it did dye the page. But also, if you'll notice, that stuff at the center is pretty clear and pretty steady. It doesn't want to move. I almost feel like if I added more water to like this area right here, it would be more legible because something more like this would remain. So yeah, you would have more than square 1, you'd have probably square 2.5 to start with. So, now this is Mead Notebook Paper. School children in the United States are probably familiar with it. This came from a spiral notebook, not the kind you find in like a lab notebook, so this stuff does tend to feather. However, here, we don't have any feathering. Now that E in copper, that is literally me putting the pen down on the paper. That is a dot. That is not a feather. Now, you need to understand just kind of how amazing it is that this essentially didn't feather. This paper feathers. You sneeze and it feathers. Like, you weren't even sneezing near the page and it feathers. Like, so the fact that this didn't really surprised me. I mean, that is very clear, concise. It didn't expand nearly as much as the 20-pound. It did expand maybe a little, but almost not at all. You can barely tell the difference. It's certainly nowhere near as much as a 20-pound. So this Mead paper, still bright, vibrant color. It doesn't feather. Now, this paper is physically thinner than the 20-pound, but we do have spots of, I think I stated here, consistent show through. Like there are these dots that keep showing up consistently through the writing. So if you're not okay with that, this might not be the easiest thing in the world to deal with. So something to be aware of. But it will look beautiful. You know, we'll have this gorgeous color. It won't feather. Or at least it certainly didn't here. And this stuff feathers so easily. Now, this paper does tend to absolutely freak out when you add water. Like if a paper's going to freak out, it's going to be this one. And yet still, more absorbent papers draw the ink in, make it harder to wash out. See the stuff at the center, like we see down here certainly, very calm, very there. Like we see in the E, very calm, very there. At the bottom of the T. So I almost feel like if I had added more water and like washed out more of this brown, that would have gone away. I would have had this faint, chalky red that would have been fairly clear. Now it did feather and explode with the brown, but here you'll have square one. Lastly, we have Moleskine notebook paper. Took 7.5 seconds to dry, and it looks like this. Yep. Once again, because again this is almost like a cream colored paper, it just sort of mostly goes brown, like a tanned leather brown. And we have feathering. And we have lots of bleed. And yes, this is a legit bleed. See how dark and clear that is? That made it to the back. And in some places, and you can probably guess where, it made it onto the page below. Yay! I hate this stuff. You can, if you look closely, you can actually see the little lumps of pulp that they mashed together to make what they call paper. You should not be able to see that, especially not for this price. And as I said, usually Mead's the one to freak out. Nope. Nope. Here, even the stuff at the center started to feather and explode. Like, yeah, some of the brown washed away, but then the stuff on the inside started to freak out as well. This would be, just don't buy this. Why would you buy this? Don't buy it. Friends don't let friends buy Moleskine. Anyways, there you go for your consideration. The one, the only, Diamine Ancient Copper is beautiful. It's beautiful. I have yet to find an ink that comes even close to doing what this does. Especially for the color of copper, which I love. Like, I actually really love the color copper. Yeah. No, it's gorgeous. It has so many things going on. It has a sheen that matches the name. I mean, it's great. Not a lot of water resistance, by which I mean essentially none. And it's not fast drying, so if you're left-handed, make friends with someone who's right-handed or something. I don't know, I really don't have a solution to that, but yeah, beautiful, gorgeous ink, great, get it. I'll never regret telling you that. For your consideration from the Triple N Network, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.